Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Marketing for Learning podcast. As promised, I told you I had another really exciting guest lined up, and I am joined today by Nelson. Nelson, if you don't know, and I feel like everybody should know, is the CEO of How Now and the author of Learning at Speed. Nelson, hi, how are you?
Hannah, thanks for having me on the show. I feel honoured.
No, behave yourself. It's an honour to have you here. Tell the audience a bit about yourself. If they don't know who you are, like I said, I feel like they should. But tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
I guess I'm trying to pick out the highlights of the career. Started in film, actually, but many people don't know that. Started in a production company, making commercials, music videos, came into tech, so it's quite a video advertising tech company, and then found myself after that company doing well, really liked tech, and I wanted to use tech for a problem that really mattered. So I wanted to find a problem that I could spend the next few years of my life on, even if I didn't solve it, at least it was good use of my time. And really the problem that I was drawn to was, I'm a big believer that the right skills in the right hands can solve some of the biggest problems in the world, right? You see it all the time. And it was quite worrying for me to, at that point in time, almost a decade ago, that people were worried about this kind of skills gap crisis. Governments were starting to subsidize it. And that was a decade ago, right? The problems just got worse. And you could also see the kind of personal consequences of that, where I could look around family and friends who weren't investing in their own skill development. And I can see, well, these guys risk becoming socially and economically irrelevant. And that's a big problem, not just for them, but for us as family, but also wider society. And so it's a problem I really cared about. And so I thought, okay, how can you use technology to do that? So I very much came into the L&D world as an outsider, coming more as a technologist to look at how do you solve this fundamental problem. And I don't think it's an L&D problem, right? Like, people getting the right skills and making sure we're continuously learning isn't just an L&D problem. It's all of our problems, and we should all care. Mm-hmm. And I think being an outsider, we just came at it for a very different lens. And so as we learned more and more about workplace learning and learning and development, we formed our kind of worldview around it. And the great thing about coming from a completely different discipline is you can borrow from different disciplines, right? And quite often you find when you borrow from different disciplines, you get a completely new perspective on the same thing. And so we were able to kind of escape the kind of echo chambers that already existed. And that kind of led to kind of forming How Now, which takes a very different approach to helping organizations connect learning to those business outcomes. And then also we ended up forming our own playbook, because often what you find is when you create new tech with an old playbook isn't that effective. And we couldn't see an existing playbook out there. And so we started writing our own. We got great feedback from our customers who were using this, and they were like, this is a very different way of looking at it. COVID hit. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I write a book? Why don't I turn this playbook into a book? We all did crazy things during that time. Yep. My crazy thing was to spend 12 months writing this book. But it just meant I can capture that playbook with those real stories into a book. And that was Learning at Speed.
I love that. And genuinely, as people know listening to this podcast, I'm not a huge fan of learning tech, but I've always had a sweet spot for you guys because the data's there. Learning tech this year, I came up to you after the session and said how phenomenal. I've completely forgotten the company name that did your session.
Hotel Plan. Yeah.
That was it, Hotel Plan. Came up to you and I said, Hotel Plan session literally blew me away. I found myself, I was there as like a bit of a fangirl, like, oh, I want to see inside How Now. And then I started taking pictures as like a learner. I was like, wait, this is a great process. This is a great way of doing things. So I really, genuinely, I know a lot of tech companies say, we do things differently. But you guys do. And that's why we're so happy to have you here today. And as you probably know, we've recently launched our proprietary way of doing things, the People Impact Loop. And there's a big word in the middle of that, of impact, which is bounded around in our industry. We're always talking about, oh, we get impact, or tech vendors promise impact, and off-the-shelf libraries promise impact, and it never happens. And we seem on this wheel of never-ending doom, essentially. And we want to change that. And it's all about measurement, really, isn't it? But when we think about the word impact in L&D, what does that actually mean to you? What do you think impact for L&D teams really is?
Yeah, it's interesting you asked that question, because just as you were saying that, Hannah, I was thinking about other functions like sales, marketing. And if you were selling something or talking about a strategy in any one of those, I don't think I see the word impact come up that often. You often and put a name to the actual impact, right? Like more sales or more opportunities. And there's probably something telling in the fact that we're using quite a vague, arbitrary label, because it's like, we know we need to be doing something the rest of the business can feel, but we're not quite sure what that thing is yet. And I think really what we're trying to say with anyone who's using impact is really going back to the question, why does this matter? Why are you doing what you do? Right?
Yeah.
What difference is it making? Why should we all care? Why should we give it time? Why should we give it budget? What's the difference that you're making is really what we're asking with that impact. And I think impact is just a word that everyone seems to have landed on. But I do think it's an important question to put more detail to that. Because the reality is, speaking to many L&D professionals now, they are really under more pressure than ever before, not just L&D, but HR largely. It's unsurprising because you've got CEOs who've got FOMO, right? They don't want to be left behind. The speed of innovation right now, they're like, what the hell? We need to be doing something. And they're going to L&D and HR and going, do we have the skills to do this? If not, how is your job helping us get this? And if it's not helping us get this, then what the hell are you doing? And then you've got employees who've got FOBO, the fear of becoming obsolete. Yeah. And it's real. There are people coming into a workforce today who are genuinely worried they don't have what it takes to be able to keep up, and they're just coming into the workforce. And so they've got very little patience now for learning for the sake of learning. So anytime L&D go, can you do this? They're like, yeah, but why? Right? What am I going to get out of this? What's the outcome? Yeah. And so, they're putting a lot of pressure. And then you've got like the poor managers who are crying in the corner because they're on the front line of a very demanding workforce who are going, I need you to help me grow. And they're like, what do I do? Like, what do you need help with? How do I help you? And so with all of this demand coming from so many different personas in the organization, you kind of, at the very least, you need to be saying the word impact. Even if you've not really thought about it, you're like, impact. But you really need to put more color to it. And I think that's really the driving force at the moment now. They're under more pressure than ever before.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you said there about like looking at other teams, and like the sales team would say more sales, or marketing teams will say more leads. I think the difference is with L&D as well. Every L&D team in a unique organisation will have a unique measurement of impact, what that means for your organisation. In some sales teams, for example, it will be more sales. In others, it will be reduced churn. And like, what's the priority? And I think often L&D teams are looking in the wrong places for what that impact should be. They're looking to tech companies or thought leaders to tell us, what should we be striving towards in L&D? Look inside your business. What's the business goals? How are you as an L&D team helping hit that business goal? What are you doing to move the organisation forward? Sometimes I think we can get a bit caught up in the echo chamber. Like you said at the beginning, that's why you came with a really fresh perspective. I think L&D teams can as well, and they're looking for, everyone on LinkedIn saying AI is really important, so I've got to use AI, not thinking about what's actually right for the business. And I think that's a really big thing that people need to think about when it comes to impact. It's personal. It's for your organisation. It's for your team. Define it yourself, I think, is a big thing for me. Like, work out what's right for you.
And I think, Hannah, what you're talking today is probably true, I think, for a lot of the challenges we face in L&D and otherwise, which is, so there's this thing called first principle thinking. It's when you kind of break down a problem down to its fundamental truths. Like, what is actually true? Strip out the biases, strip out the assumptions. I talk about this in the book as well. The opposite of that is called reasoning by analogy, right? Mm-hmm. Which is exactly what you said. I saw this on LinkedIn, so I'm going to do this. Or so-and-so did this, so I'm going to do this. This is how it's always been done, so I'm going to do this. And the problem with reasoning by analogy is when you do it for those reasons, right, you're basically carrying on someone else's assumptions. So you don't know whether the assumptions that were made by that person is flawed, are they right, like what biases are in there. And so when you, without questioning the foundations of it, when you just do what they've done, you're inheriting the flawed assumptions that they may have made. And that's the risk, right? Like, if you imagine you build on top of one person's flawed assumptions and another person's flawed assumptions, I mean, when you've got that many flaws in it, it's hard to get anything right. Yeah. And I think it's really stripping it down to the first principles of what's the fundamental truth here. So for us, the fundamental truth here is learning in most organizations right now is disconnected from the business. right? And as an afterthought, they're trying to connect it to the business, right? Like if the damage is done, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, how can I say this was connected to the business in the first place? And it's quite telling when learning is disconnected from the business, right? It often looks like a bit like what I was saying earlier, like employees are overwhelmed. So they're overwhelmed by the fact that you're throwing a lot of content. A good telltale sign is you're throwing a lot of content, you're running a lot of programs, yet when you run an employee engagement survey, people say, I don't feel like there's enough learning and development opportunities. Or in exit interviews, they say there isn't. And you're sitting there confused going, but I created all of these programs. How could they be saying this in the employee NPS? That's a good telltale sign that your learning is disconnected from your business. If managers are saying that they feel frustrated, that they can't better support the people in their team, that's a good telltale sign. A really big telltale sign is in the name of trying to prove impact, actually what you're trying to do is prove activity, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're sitting there going, how many courses you created or how many that's not impact, right? That's not a change you made or a difference you made. That's just you trying to prove your value, right? You're trying to tell the business, I've not been sitting there doing nothing, I promise. I've created about 100 courses. I bought another 1,000. I am doing a lot of work, believe me, right?
Yeah.
And what you end up with when learning is disconnected from the business, you get a lot of activity without impact. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people just trying to prove activity. And that's what that landscape looks like. Now, what does it look like when you connect it? Well, you first start with the business, right? You start by asking the question of, all right, we've got a bunch of, I look at it almost like a top of a pyramid, right? The top of the pyramid is every company has a mission, and every company has a strategy to achieve that mission, and then they have a bunch of objectives or OKRs to see whether they're on track for doing that, right? That's the top of the pyramid. And now I'm asking, okay, this quarter or the next 6 months, what are those top objectives for the business? And you tell me it's improving customer retention, right? Mm-hmm. Now what that looks like is I need to go, okay, what are the roles that are going to influence these objectives? Do they have the skills to do that? What skills do they need to be able to do that? That opens up the conversation around what areas you need to develop in order to achieve that objective. Then you work backwards to go, okay, do we have learning? What knowledge is going to help this? What type of learning is going to help us achieve this? And you can constantly check to see whether you're moving in the right direction or not. Because if retention's getting worse and not getting better, then that's probably a telltale sign whatever you're doing isn't working. But so what the pyramid then for us looks like is you've got kind of below objectives, you've got the skills layer to go, okay, what's the kind of individual and team skills required to be able to achieve those objectives? Then you've got learning, right? And so quite often what you find in organizations in that pyramid, that kind of skills layer is missing. So it's like learning, then there's a massive gap in the pyramid, and then it's business objectives, right?
Yeah.
And that's why there's a disconnect. So it feels a bit like bingo. Someone's calling out a number. If you're lucky, someone else has got the number. Very rarely they don't. And when they don't, every time the numbers don't line up, you're wasting time, money, resources, and no one's got time, money, resources to waste.
No, exactly. But playing devil's advocate, say you were in the organisation, say somebody's listening to this thinking, yeah, I know I've got a lot of content. I've got the post-COVID syndrome that I bought loads of content in 2020 just to make sure there was something for people to learn. Now I've got too much and it's all there. I've created 100 courses, like you said, but I know that skills layer is missing and I know I'm not connected to the business. How do they backwards populate that? How do they fix that? How would they get to the point that they can really think of that pyramid?
Yeah, so this is quite common, Hannah. In most cases, this is the situation we walk into, right? Like there's already an existing ecosystem of content sources and knowledge sources. And in some cases, you've got organizations where there's a bit of skills data living in a spreadsheet somewhere where it took them about a year to get to that point, and now no one's used it since. So this is typically the crazy world we exist in, right? So the first thing is, okay, that's great. We've acknowledged the fact that this skills piece is missing. So let's bring this into play. So the first one is we need to get the business speaking a skills language, right? We need to look at the business through the lens of skills. And the kind of first foundation for that is mapping your roles within your organizations to skills. Now, this is a far easier problem to solve today than it was, a couple of years ago. And so, we're one provider, but there are many other providers out there, right, who will be able to give you a skills ontology, which is essentially fancy language for saying for every role on the market, we'll tell you what skills you need. Now, there are important differentiators to look out for. There are some kind of taxonomies who will tell you this is the skill that's required for this role. Now, that's helpful, but not helpful enough, because you need to know what proficiency level is required. There's no point saying I need negotiation. Do I need it at a 1 level or 5 level?
Yeah.
And so you need the nuance of that. Now, a good model will give you that. And so that's where we start with organizations. And you're not going to do that overnight, right? Some organizations might want to do it for the entire organization, like every role. Or you might start with the most frequent roles or the most critical roles from a transformation perspective for you to get that map. So now you know what they need.
Yeah.
Right? Then you need a way of knowing what do they actually have, right? Like I need this salesperson to have a full negotiation, but what do they have? Now, deliberately, the most light touch way of doing this, the way we go about it, is a 360 skill review, right? Is you combine a self-review, peer review, and a manager review. Now, why do we do this, right? Let's look at the alternative. The alternative is I give you a test, and you ace that test. Just because you ace that test doesn't make you great at your job, right? But the 360 is these people are evidencing your application of that skill within a real world work environment, right? Like I'm saying you're a 3 out of 5 in negotiation because I've seen, based on the descriptors of behaviors that you need to show for a 3, I've seen you apply that. So it's the closest thing to evidence base in seeing you apply that in performance. And so that's a good way to know where are you at, right now. So that's one side of the puzzle, which is I now know what you need, I know what you have, I know what you don't have, where the gaps are. Now we come to the other side, which is the problem with your ecosystem is all of your different content providers are using completely different languages, right? Like you got provider A who has their own skills taxonomy for tagging. Then you got a whole bunch of informal content that doesn't even do skills tagging, like YouTube content and podcasts, for example. And so what you end up with is almost a very fragmented ecosystem, which is speaking completely different languages. So how the hell are you going to connect it to your skills strategy? So that's the part that we do then. We use that same skills taxonomy and we map it to all of your learning ecosystem. So we don't really care where your content is coming from, right? Or your opportunities. We use AI to look at what is this content about, what has it got inside, to be able to infer, okay, this learning opportunity here is going to be great for negotiation to help you get to a level 4. Now we're all speaking the same language, and it's a language the entire business can understand. That's that first foundational step. And for anyone listening who's thinking, damn, that sounds like a lot of work, it isn't. Because the great thing about this is it's, once the logic is set to do this at scale for technology, it's a very straightforward thing to do. What's the part that requires work is the marketing, right? Because if in your organization, learning has always been associated as a kind of tick box compliance exercise, the bigger part of the job here is a rebrand, right? They're all of a sudden going to be like, hold on, I thought you were the compliance person. Why are you asking me about skills now? You've got to kind of rebrand yourself there, and that's the bigger challenge.
Absolutely. And I was thinking that as you were talking about it, because we talk about marketing so much, obviously, on this podcast, but we talk of it very much as marketing to employees to get them to want to take the learning. But there's also that upwards marketing piece that we touch on sometimes of marketing to the business and say, hey, actually, look, we don't deserve the seat at the table and bang our fists on the table. We're saying, this is what we do. This is the value we are bringing. And I got quite a few snarky looks off L&D as an event last year, I think it was, when I said, well, L&D can't prove value until we bring value. So if we're still living in a world where we're just churning out content, not thinking about those skills, not aligning it to the business goals, we're not going to be able to demonstrate the value that we're bringing to the business because we're not bringing value to the business. We're doing a very good job. I don't think anyone's in L&D wanting to do badly, but I think we need to start pushing ourselves if we want to stay up to date, current. If we don't want FOBO, I hadn't heard that until this podcast. I love that now. If we don't want FOBO, if we don't want to become obsolete in our roles, we have to push forward and try to be that modern L&D function that at the moment sometimes feels like a bit of a dream world, but we've both seen it. We've seen it in organisations where it does work.
Yeah, you achieve what you measure, right? Like I think a prime example of this is, before you had all these fitness trackers and stuff like this, who cared about 10,000 steps? Yeah, it's a great example of now it's almost pop culture to say that I'm tracking my 10,000 steps. Where does that come from? It comes from you achieve what you measure. Now that we can measure our steps, we're now aiming to achieve 10,000 steps. And so if you want to achieve meaningful impact in your organization, that's only going to happen if you measure it, right? Like if you're only measuring, and this still happens today, if you're still measuring 40 hours a month that someone has to do or how many courses they've completed, then there's a good chance you probably all achieved that, right? There was one organization I remember when we were partnering with where they were all, I don't know, their comp or their performance was set against 40 hours a month.
Okay.
I've never seen a workforce who so relentlessly wanted to track their, but it made sense. Yeah, it made sense because they were, their performance was being measured on that. And, you'll find a way. Whether it's genuine learning or you're gaming the system, you'll find a way to hit 40 hours. But if you were measuring the things that actually mattered, you wouldn't care about that. I don't really care how many hours someone's been learning, as long as they're getting better at their job and they're improving, right? And they're growing in a way that's going to be great for them in their career. If that's happening and they're managing to do that with 2 hours of learning, good for them,
Yeah, and the hours learning metric always gets under my skin. I think it's because, like, my degree's in business economics and then I ended up in marketing. So I've always been quite, like, ROI, money focused. If you say to a CFO, oh, but every employee has spent 40 hours of the last month learning, they're just going to be thinking about how inefficient that is and how much lost time that is for the business. Why weren't they doing their jobs?
Yeah.
Granted, we know, of course, you have to invest time in learning to get the benefits of it. But they don't want to know the hours learned. They want to know the benefits at the end of it. And like you said, if we're not measuring those things and we can only report on hours learned, completion rates, smile sheets, we're never going to improve if we're not measuring the right things, are we?
You wouldn't get away with it. And it reminds me of like in marketing, for example, right? If you sat there and said, I was only measuring how many people clicked on an ad, but I don't know if anyone bought or not, you would never get away with that.
No,
right?
You wouldn't get away with it.
And that's exactly what this is. You're telling me how many people clicked on the ad, but you don't know whether they bought the product or not. You don't know if you've driven any revenue and there's a return on that particular investment. And you just wouldn't get away with it in any other team. And that's why I think now there is just less tolerance for this. And I think the kind of fear of becoming obsolete here, that if in L&D we need to think about here, is if you are doing something that is quite repetitive, right, and quite operational, there's no two ways about it. AI will be able to do that and be able to do it most likely better than you could do it right now.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing, right? That's not a bad thing. Let AI do that, right?
Yeah.
You're more value in an area that AI is not going to be able to do, right? And the sense of organization that you have being here to be able to communicate and discuss to each of the stakeholders. Again, AI would be great at gathering data, making inferencing, and being one of the contributors to a strategic decision that you need to make. But you need to be able to raise your game beyond the operational in order to be able to survive and to make sure L&D will exist in some shape or form. We might not call it that, but the kind of solving this problem will exist. But whether you will be in that role will come down to how you adapt.
Absolutely. And you spoke a lot about what gets measured gets improved. So when we're thinking about L&D and a modern L&D team, what should they be measuring when it comes to L&D outputs? What should we be reporting back to the C-suite rather than completions and hours learned?
Yeah. So I think I break this down, Hannah, into kind of 3 parts for more of a comprehensive measurement of it, right? And the way to think about this is continuous measurement is the foundation of continuous learning, right? If you're going to continuously learn, you're going to iterate and improve on it. That means you're continuously measuring to see what's working, what's not working, etc. And so if you break down those 3 things, the first one, and this is the one that we already do quite a lot of, is proof of knowledge, right? So this is where I've watched a video of someone riding a bike. And if you ask me, how do you ride a bike? I'd be able to tell you, right?
Okay.
I'd be able to tell you, you get on a bike, you put your foot on the pedal, but that doesn't mean I know how to ride the bike. I just know the steps for riding a bike, right? That's what proof of knowledge is. And we already do a lot of that right now, where you test assessments, whether you're doing it synchronous or you're doing asynchronous assessments. We already do a lot of that. Now, that just tells me what you know. Now, the problem with stopping at that point is we're rewarding people who know things, but not necessarily could do things, right? Yeah. And so the gap we still have is between learning and doing. And the big difference between workplace learning and your kind of traditional education is, you know, like, for example, Pythagoras theorem. Hannah, have you ever used Pythagoras theorem?
I couldn't even tell you what it is anymore. and I got an A in maths.
Like, me too. And that just goes to show where the problem is. Education is, you learn a whole bunch of stuff that you're never really in the context to apply. And you might never be in the context to apply. And that's completely different to workplace learning, because workplace learning is all about learning things where I am in the context to be able to apply what I've learned. And so the fact that we borrow a lot of stuff from traditional education, which was built for a completely different purpose, blows my mind. But that's the problem, where traditional education is heavily based on proof of knowledge. And we've kind of carried that baggage over here and built workplace learning in a way it's heavily focused on proof of knowledge. But we need to move beyond that. The second one is proof of skill. Now, this is that I can do this, right? So you give me a bike and I can actually get on the bike and ride the bike, and I can practice that. You give me feedback. I get better at that. That's the second one, where we design the learning experience in a way where it generates a proof of skill. That could be a simulation. We recently launched an AI agent called Guru, which essentially can simulate scenarios to evaluate your skill. Right? Like if you said you're good at managing difficult conversations, it will give you a difficult conversation, see how you perform. It will evaluate, say, you could have done this better, you did this well. It evaluates that. That's one way of evaluating that skill. The 360 skill review based on people is a good one. To kind of give an insight into where I think AI will play. I think AI will play a big role here. Like I mentioned, scenarios and simulations, but the reality is AI can be our eyes and ears now. So anything where you would have assessed skill based on observation, which is hard to scale, but actually now with AI, it isn't so hard to scale, right? Like AI can understand the rubric of how you're going to assess. It can then watch you do the thing and say that you're at about 3 out of 5. You could do this better. But that's a proof of skill. You're thinking about upfront, how is someone going to apply, and we're going to assess whether they can do this or not. Then you got the third one and the final one, and that's the proof of kind of performance, right? And that's where the difference there is, yes, you can ride the bike, but the job is I need to ride the bike from the restaurant to the house that I need to deliver the food to, right?
Yeah.
And that's an application of that skill within certain work constraints and context, right? Now, how do we judge that? That's where the performance data comes into play, right? This is where you speak to other business stakeholders to understand whether what they've been learning and the skills they've been building is actually contributing to the business objective or not. And you look at the data in a very simple term. Let's say, our win rate is 20%. You want to get it up to 30%. You ask your head of sales, right? You go, what's the baseline today? Where do we want to get to? You keep checking in every month, every quarter to see if we're moving in the right direction. Now, at this point, the most common objection I get is, Nelson, just because the sales win rate is getting better, it doesn't mean L&D had a role to play, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I often see a very big misunderstanding, which is people expect, or L&D themselves expect, to be the solo hero in this. And the reality is no function in a business is ever a solo hero, right? And that's not the business's expectation. What your kind of executive committee want to see, or your team want to see, is, did you influence this? Were you a contributor onto this? So let's go back to my win rate example. If the win rate is going up, I would then go and speak to the head of sales. I'd speak to the account executives, the account managers there, and go, how's your behavior changed? They'll say, well, I started doing A, B, and C. All right, why did you start doing A, B, and C all of a sudden? Well, I've been going through this coaching program with so-and-so, and then I went on this workshop that taught me how to do this. That's your story. And so what you end up with is quantitative and qualitative data. And that's when you triangulate, right? Triangulate is to go use these different data points to be able to bring them together and form your impact narrative around how these dots connect to tell that story. And I think somewhat the problem here is I see some people not valuing qualitative data as much. Like it's almost like it has to be a number. But quite often you'll find a lot of the most meaningful things in life can't be measured by numbers. Exactly. And the same is true for some parts of things we do within a business. And so that's what that last part looks like, proof of performance. Now, all three of these building blocks come in right up front when you're designing a learning experience, right? One of the aspects of thinking about your learning experience is how do you create those opportunities to generate a proof of knowledge, to generate a proof of skill, and to generate a proof of performance?
So where do you think L&D teams get the most stuck then? Because in theory, it's like, well, okay, why is everybody not doing that? That makes so much sense. What is it that holds them back? What's the jarring point?
Well, I'd say it's quite different now. If you had asked me a couple of years ago, we were stuck at proof of knowledge. No two ways about it, right? Like, I mean, we've been, again, coming as an outsider, we've been talking about skills since we first started, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how many learning technology providers can say this, but our first iteration of our platform had skills. The same philosophy, connecting learning to skills, so you're building the things you need to do your job well. But it didn't land well, quite honestly. People didn't get it. So we'd try talking about it, then we'd have to play it down because people were like, no, skills, no, we're not ready for this, etc. And I feel like we've lasted long enough to get to a point where actually now the world has kind of come around. And so now I see a lot more, not enough is happening. The adoption is starting to happen, but we're very much in the early days of that type of thinking of connecting learning to skill. And so I feel like we're now at the stage of generating proof of skill. And the reason it hasn't been done much is there are things that are difficult to do. Now, here's my pet peeve, if you want, right? There's a few things that are really hard about doing proof of skill. We spoke about this earlier around knowing what skills people need, what skills they actually have, and measuring that. But the thing is, this is where AI is really good. AI is really good at helping us solve the problems that we could never solve before because it was just too hard to do manually as humans, right?
Yeah.
Instead of using AI for that, it really hurts me to see AI being used for trivial things to like automate and just do terrible things faster, right? Like when we actually could be finally climbing that peak that we could never climb before using AI. But anyway, that's my rant over. Yeah. So that's where I think AI will play a big bit with generating proof of skill. And I think that will naturally get us to the proof of performance, right? Because to generate the proof of skill, we will have to have conversations with the wider business. And quite often I see it's quite simple, practical things that get in the way. Like you've got L&D people who've never spoken to the business stakeholders.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's just a simple, practical thing. If you had some form of relationship with your head of sales, head of marketing, you're talking to other business stakeholders, it's a much easier conversation to go, how would you know if this is working? Yeah. I know you asked me for this program, but how would you know if this was working, right? It feels like a more awkward conversation to have if you have no relationship and like the first thing you say to this person is this, right?
Well, it's so funny you say that, Nelson. We had a guest earlier in the series, Heather Burwright, and she said exactly that. We were talking all about that relationship building, and you can't just go up to somebody and go, no, you're wrong. That's not how you do it. That's not how we're going to build good relationships. And I think a lot of our problems in L&D do come back to the fact that we've been in a silo for so long and we're so content just in our little L&D bubble. And actually we need to make friends beyond that. We talk about that a lot at Maths, especially in our training calls, of like that business partnering and actually going out and having friends. And marketers do it so well. Marketers know everything about the business. And I don't think it's just in our character that we're all quite sociable people. It's quite deliberate too. We do need to know what's going on in the other functions. L&D need to take a bit of that. And 100%. Like you said, we're terrified of the qualitative data. We're terrified of having those conversations because people want a number to it. But a project I've just completed, they told me, went in and they knew that their L&D function was a bit of a mess and they're doing a big old overhaul process at the moment. And they said to me, everyone says there's not enough time. Time is the only reason. But then when I dug deeper, it was, they haven't got enough time to spend the hours it was taking them searching through the platform or away from, like some of them were in factories, so away from the actual machine line. They couldn't do that. So they only had 5 minutes. So they needed something much more bite-sized. And you wouldn't get that if you asked a drop-down list of why don't you get involved in learning? Time. It's easy. I haven't got the time. But you need that narrative behind it to solve the problem in the first place and then to measure the impact. We need to get more comfortable. Yes, I do. Like I've already said, I've got an economics degree. I like the numbers. I like the data. Quants is so important. But we need to be able to tell that story. And like you said, actually bring those different pieces of data together to say, this is what's happening. And we can't do this without the voice of the audience, without the voice of our stakeholders. We can't do it without the conversations. And it's such a big piece that I think L&D miss far too often, in my opinion.
100%. I think the time spent learning one, I think year after year, there's surveys that come out that say the biggest blocker to learning is time. And I think what you find there when you dig into that data, much like you said, is you find all of these people who are saying time is a blocker are learning, right? They're just not learning inside your ecosystem, right? If you ask them, are you listening to podcasts? Are you reading blogs? Are you on LinkedIn following a bunch of thought leaders that to get like nuggets of knowledge from? They're doing all of that, right? It's just, it probably doesn't come under the definition of what you're saying or thinking about is learning. But also, you're not the ones providing them with that. What they're really saying to you is, I don't have time to learn the irrelevant stuff that you think is relevant for me. That's what they're saying, right? I don't have time to learn for the sake of learning and do the things that you think are important to me. And so one or two things need to happen. Either you need to do a better job of explaining to me why this thing is important, right? This is where the marketing piece, and this is why I love what you do, because that is really important, the marketing piece, because it helps identify the unknown unknowns, right? Yeah. I might be able to find the known unknowns. I know I have this knowledge gap or skills gap, and I'm going to go find the thing that's going to help me close that gap. I can do that. That's fine. But the things I don't know, and they're important. That's where L&D play a critical role of going, look, this is where the market is moving. This is our organization's journey within this market. Based on that, we think A, B, and C is what we need. And therefore, you need to be learning this in order to be able to contribute to that. I wouldn't have thought about that. That's where the role they come in. And so you've got to get better around talking about the value you're going to offer that individual. And the second part touches on what you said, or make it easier for them to find the things that they're already finding, but make it easier. And this is why I usually use this analogy of kind of, you're no longer creating everything someone's going to consume, right? You're more like the conductor of the L&D orchestra, right? Like you've got to put down your instrument, right? And pick up the waving stick and everything, the instruments here are all of your different sources inside your ecosystem. And you're just taking out the friction for people to find stuff. If they're already going to a blog, then bring that blog into, one of the things, again, I'm biased, but we do well, is you can bring in your blogs, you can bring in your YouTube channels, you can bring in your podcast feeds. Is what we want to do is map that to skills that are aligned to their level and make it easier for them to find the things that they already like to engage with. And I think that's really the role we need to look at playing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just love it. This whole series has been about the people impact loop, and Ash and I were so purposeful when we made it a loop. It's never ending. We go straight from the measure and impact piece, straight back into the business insights, straight back into the campaigns. It's a never ending loop. And you've said about removing the friction, and I did another episode with Tom McDowell, and his word of the whole podcast was frictionless. We need to be making it frictionless. And I promise anyone listening that Nelson hasn't heard either of these two episodes yet, but it's so important that we all start thinking about how we can really remove the friction. Like you said, we do it in marketing. It's the UX design. We think about how do we actually get somebody to purchase our product, how they navigate through our website. We don't do enough of that in L&D. And that's what your research is going to be showing you. That's what the measurement is going to be showing you. And like you've already said, what gets measured gets improved. So you realise, there's a big gap there. How do we change that? Change it, and then you'll see how things are actually going in the right direction for your L&D team. Doesn't have to be as big as we were talking about earlier with aligning every skill to everything. Yes, you need to get there in the end, but start with the small steps. Start with those tiny things of, actually, there's a big lot of friction there. People can't find anything. That's a big bit of friction that most organisations see. How can we improve it? And then see how you get that flywheel approach of, actually, this is really working for us now.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite startup sayings is think big, start small, right? And because it's so true, right? What you need is, you need the vision of where this is going to go. But you've got to start small to get that buy-in, right? And quite often the challenge or question I get asked is around getting buy-in and getting stakeholders. And there's no better way than doing something and generating proof that shows that actually this is moving in that right direction. And I think that's why the starting small. And we say this even when you're kind of mapping out skills, just start small, start with a team, start with a role, and build the case for it by doing it. No one's expecting it to be big bang. And I think sometimes this expectation that it has to be big bang. People find it overwhelming and therefore don't do anything. Right?
Yeah,
They're like,
it's the fear.
It's the fear. It's the fear of messing up this one.
Yeah.
It's the fear of messing up because it seems so big and so long before you're going to see value. You think the easier thing is to not do anything.
Not do anything.
But actually, that's counterintuitive because that is the biggest risk. Doing nothing is not an option.
Yeah. And I spoke to a client that's on our masterclass at the moment just this morning, and like many, her organisation's going through a restructure. There's so many challenges that are facing them. And I think actually, given that the nature of our market at the moment, that think big but start small is really, really important for everyone to think about, because you probably haven't got the budget to do it for your whole organisation right now today, but you can do one small step that's moving us towards that proof of performance piece versus just, hey, they've spent 5 hours learning last week, woohoo. Like, we need to start thinking about pushing ourselves forward. But when we think about that proof of performance piece, it's been spoken about. I've been in the industry, but probably around the same time that you have, to be fair, just over 10 years. And everyone's always spoken about behaviour change and performance improvement and stuff like that. What do you think people can measure within their teams to actually demonstrate L&D's impact on those metrics? Obviously, sales is a really easy example, isn't it, of more sales. But what else can people be looking at if they're sitting here listening, going, right, I love this. What do I need to go and do? What do you think they need to go and measure?
Yeah, it's interesting you said this, Hannah, because we talk about this internally, where actually a lot of when someone's like, I'll give you a completely unrelated example. I remember in the early days of when I was starting up my first business as a startup, right? And you're like, how do I hit that first 1 million in revenue mark, and how are you building? And you like read every blog, listen to every podcast, hoping someone's going to tell you that kind of secret, that magic, all right? That thing that no one said, and the penny drops and you're like, oh my God, that's what I need to do. And you realize there's no such thing, right? Like with most things in life, you realize it's the boring things. And our mind is just not ready to accept this boring thing could be the secret to doing that. And hence we look beyond that for something that sounds more magical as a way of doing it, right? Like no one wants to hear patience and perseverance. That's not
I haven't got time for that.
Tell me something else. Yeah, tell me how I'm going to do it in 60 minutes. And I think so. But if you look at years and years, and I think a good test of quality is whether it survives time, right? Time is a good filter of quality, right? Like if there was wisdom that was around 100 years ago and it still applies today, that's a good filter, right? That means loads of people have reviewed it and said it's good. And the reason why I say that is actually a lot of the things that we recommend today, and most of the wisdom that we share, it's been around for years, right? Like you said, behavior change, performance, and it's there. And so you ask the question of, okay, it's not a lack of knowing how to do it. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of things I would put it down to doing it. One is you don't feel the need to do it. I think there has been an environment where if someone's not asking the question, you don't necessarily feel to go find that answer. And now I think there's somewhat of that, but actually that's because they've never looked at the L&D function, the chances are, as something that was ever really going to contribute to business value. It was a cost center. I need to have you there. You're going to do compliance. I don't really see you as a strategic contributor. So I don't have to ask you strategic questions because that's not what I expect of you. So if you're not being asked those questions, it's because they don't think that highly of you is really the reality there.
Yeah, hard truth. But...
Yeah, and I think that's why this has been around, but you've not really done it because you didn't feel the need to do it. Now the environment has changed. There is a need to do it. This current status quo isn't acceptable for you to do it. Now we start talking about the kind of next level down. It's do I have the infrastructure, the relationships, the tools to be able to do it? And it's overcoming those pains. Now, coming to what data you look at, and this is a common one I've had, which is, sales, it's easy. Well, the reality is every team within a business should have some form of objective or OKR. If it doesn't, then that's a much bigger problem within the business, right? Because,
that's not an L&D problem.
Yeah, that's not an L&D problem. That's a problem where the business doesn't quite know right now how, to the high level objectives, your team's objectives and the individual's objectives are going to contribute, right? That's that's the chain here, right? Like, I mean, that's how we've structured it here at HANA. Like, individuals have their OKRs, which contribute to team OKRs, and they contribute to the company level OKRs. So everyone knows that alignment of me doing this is going to do this at company level. Yeah. Now, assuming you have that, there should always be a baseline and a delta for every objective.
Yeah.
Right? And even in something that, say, change programs or product innovation projects, right? And it might be a while before you start to see a commercial delta. There are still things around delivery within time. You know, how many times did we miss the deadline, or what? There's always a delta you can pick out there. And I think it's trying to figure out, what does the business want to see, and then trying to put a number to the thing that they're trying to see.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why the great thing here is L&D, again, we don't have to be solo heroes. Let's work with everyone else in the business to agree on what numbers look like. And if your executive team have said, this number here, that looks good. Right? Like, if we can hit there or move towards this, that's what good looks like, regardless of what you're doing. I mean, we've gone through this exercise so many times with organizations we work with, right? And never once have we seen a team or a project where you couldn't put a number to it, right?
Yeah.
Because what we have found, though, L&D teams don't always have that number.
Yeah.
Right? So
absolutely.
How it typically works is we ask the question, L&D don't have that number. Then we say, can you ask so-and-so who owns that number? Can we come in to run a session with so-and-so who owns that number? And it's news to them, because that's the first time L&D hears that number and go, oh, that's helpful. Now I know what I need to do. And that's often what we see as the blocker.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you. I think the answer to that, what should we be measuring, is that you don't need to be that solo hero that you were saying. As L&D, I think we almost have this expectation of ourselves that we are the subject matter experts in everything. And the reason why sales is so easy to talk about is because sales is all around us. We all understand selling more and making the business more money. It's obvious whether you're in sales or not. You don't have to know the ins and outs of the IT team. Go and talk to the head of IT. What is the objective of your team? What, like you said, what the numbers we can put to this. You don't need to know that as an L&D'er off the top of your head. But go and, like we've already said, build the relationships, talk to the people, find out what those numbers are. Yes, sales is a really easy one for us to talk about objectively for any organisation because it's obvious. Yeah. That doesn't mean it's the only team that we can do it in. And like you said, if there's a team in your business that doesn't have an OKR or at least some sort of objective and plan, that's a bigger problem than just, giving them learning.
Yeah.
So I think I could carry on this conversation for but I'm really conscious we're at time. So if there was one thing that you think listeners of the Marketing for Learning podcast should do today to make sure that they're measuring impact and actually helping their organisation move forward, what's that one thing that they should do?
I think all good things start with asking the right question, Hannah, right? I think you ask the right question, you will then do the right things to get to the answer, right? And so I think starting from today, whatever you're going to work on, ask the question of what is the business metric that will tell me whether this is working or not. That will drive everything else, right? That will drive the value proposition behind whatever you do from a learning perspective, because you can now break that down to the business to go, well, we're doing this. This is why you're giving me budget. It's because we're going to achieve X. We're going to help you achieve this. To the individual, when you're the individual is also paying. They're just paying with time, right? They might not be giving budget, but they're paying with time. And so you're convincing them by saying, look, you're going to give me time because I'm going to help you do this better, which means more money for you and more money for the business, whatever that value proposition is. And so I think start with asking that question, because too often that question, when it does get asked, gets asked after everything has happened, right? At that point, there's very little you can do at that point. There are things you can do, but there's very little you can do.
And it's harder at that point as well.
It is much, much harder, right? And so I'd say ask the right question. Why are you doing what you're doing? Why are you getting out of bed? Ask them. Why are you working on this thing for the next few months? Start with that question.
Absolutely love that. And I like that concept you said there of like kind of backwards calculating it. So start with proof of knowledge, proof of skill, proof of performance. What are those metrics? And work back. And then you're going to end up with something that actually works for the business. I love that. So thank you so much for being here, Nelson. It's long overdue you being on the podcast. If anyone listening wants to find you, where can they find you?
You can find me on all the usual places. LinkedIn is probably the place I'm most active on. So you can find me Nelson Sivalingam on LinkedIn. And if you want to get in touch, I'm Nelson@gethownow.com.
Perfect. And I will also include a link to your book in the show notes because I bloomin' loved it. It's such a great read. And of course, special place in my heart because there's a marketing chapter.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining
Thanks,
us, Nelson.
Anna. Thanks,
I'll
Anna.
speak to you soon.